In 1939, Germany sent a full expedition to Antarctica, mapped hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, and dropped thousands of metal markers claiming the land as Neuschwabenland. Mainstream history calls it a quick survey. But why permanent metal darts if you never plan to return? Let's go straight to the historic records. Not textbooks, not modern historians, but the actual 1939 expedition report by Captain Alfred Richer himself. The ship was the Miss Schwabenland, a catapult-equipped freighter. On board, 2 Dornier Wall seaplanes named Boreas and Passat. They flew 15 photogrammetric missions, covering roughly 600,000 square kilometers of what is now called Queen Maud Land. They took over 11,000 aerial photographs, and at every turning point of their flight paths, every 20 to 30 kilometers, they dropped 1.2-meter long aluminium darts. Each one had a steel tip, stabilizer wings, and was stamped with the swastika and Deutsche Antarktis. These were not paper flags. These were engineered to punch into the ice and stay there for decades. Now here comes the part every obedient History Channel repeats. It was just about whale fat. Germany was importing 200,000 tons of whale oil every year from Norway and Britain. Whale oil was the key ingredient for margarine, soap, glycerin for explosives. Basically everything the 4-year plan needed to survive a war without foreign imports. So the official story is, Richer and his men were simply scouting the best whaling grounds so Germany could build its own stations and stop paying Norway. Sounds reasonable on paper until you ask the obvious questions the records themselves raise. If this was really just a commercial whale survey, why drop permanent metal claim markers at all? Why not just take photos and leave? Why name an entire region Neuschwabenland like they were planting a flag for future generations? Why equip the expedition with military precision mapping and a grid pattern of darts if the plan was fly around, look for whales, go home? The obedient answer is always the same. It was symbolic. They never followed up. The claim was abandoned after the war. But the records show something different. The darts were dropped in a deliberate pattern. The photography was obsessive. The expedition left right on the eve of World War II. And within weeks of their return, Norway rushed to formally claim the exact same territory. So the real question isn't whether they were looking for whale fat. The real question is, why did they mark the surface like they knew they were coming back? Fast forward a few years. It's 1943. Admiral Karl D. Feynitz has just been promoted to Supreme Commander of the Navy. He's standing in front of his elite U-boat officers, and he drops this line, recorded in multiple post-war accounts and repeated by men who were in the room. The German submarine fleet is proud of having built for the Fährier. In another part of the world, a Shangri-La on land, an impregnable fortress. Shangri-La, impregnable fortress. In another part of the world, the obedient historians say he was probably talking about some secret base in Norway or Malaysia, or maybe it's completely made up, no original transcript exists. But let's look at what actually happened instead of what they want us to repeat. Right after the Schwabenland expedition returned, D. Feynitz's U-boat fleet began operating with supply lines that never made sense on paper. Then, in the final months of the war, long-range Type IX and Type XI submarines started disappearing from the North Atlantic grid. Some of them never came back to Germany because they didn't need to. In July and August 1945, 2 full months after Germany's official surrender on May 8, 2 long-range German U-boats surfaced in Argentina, far from any European surrender point. First came U-530, a Type IXC Fe 40 boat under Oberleutnant Zur C. Otto Wermuth. It arrived at Mar del Plata on the 10th of July, 1945. The crew had ignored D. Feynitz's surrender order. When they surfaced, the ship's log was missing, destroyed or thrown overboard. The deck gun had been jettisoned. The crew carried no personal identification papers. Interrogations by Argentine, American, and British authorities later asked the obvious: where had they been for over 2 months? Why the missing records? Wormuth claimed they headed south to avoid Allied capture and seek better treatment in Argentina, which had a large German community and stayed neutral longer. But the timeline doesn't add up cleanly. A direct run should have taken weeks, not an extra 60-plus days of unexplained travel. Then on the 17th of August, U-977 Type Viek, under Oberleutnant Zur, C. Heinz Schaefer pulled into the same port after 99 Fayon. 108 days at sea, including a record 66-day continuous submerged Norshal run from Norwegian waters. Schaefer gave a similar story in his post-war book and interrogations. Fear of Soviet captivity, propaganda about the Morgenthau Plan turning Germany into a wasteland, memories of harsh WW1 POW treatment. Some married crewmen had even been put ashore in Norway mid-voyage so they could return home. Like U-530, U-977's crew faced questions about high-ranking Nazis' possible landings in Argentina or even sinking the Brazilian cruiser Bahia. Both boats were handed over, crews extradited for more grilling in the US and UK, no hard proof of secret passengers ever stuck, but the suspicions never died. The obedient narrative? These were just desperate U-boat captains dodging defeat, hoping for asylum in friendly Argentina. No secret cargo, no polar detour, no connection to Neuschwabenland. The delays, bad weather, evasive routing, fuel conservation. But the records leave gaps the mainstream explanation never fully fills. Why destroy logs and discard guns right before surrender? Standard procedure only if hiding something. Why the extended southern voyage when most U-boats obeyed Defenitz and surfaced in Europe? And why did Defenitz himself boast in 1943 of an impregnable fortress built by the submarine fleet in another part of the world, a Shangri-La on land that no enemy could reach? Tie those dots together, the 1939 darts marking Neuschwabenland as permanent German territory, the obsessive aerial mapping of ice-free zones. Eat Feynitz's words about a hidden stronghold, then 2 rogue U-boats vanishing post-surrender, reappearing in South America with erased trails. Coincidence? Or the first visible threads of a larger plan, one that started with claiming the surface in Antarctica and ended with U-boats slipping away to protect what was built there. The surface remembers. The darts are still under the ice. The U-boats reach the other side of the world. And the question historians won't touch is staring us in the face. If Neuschwabenland was abandoned, why did the survivors act like it wasn't? That mystery exploded less than a year later with Operation Highjump, the largest Antarctic expedition in history. In late 1946, the United States Navy launched Task Force 68 to 13 ships, including an aircraft carrier, over 4,700 men, dozens of aircraft, and enough firepower and logistics to run a small war. Officially named the United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program. It was led in the field by Admiral Richard E. Byrd. The obedient narrative says it was all very innocent. Train personnel for cold weather operations, test new equipment, like helicopters in polar conditions, map as much of the continent as possible, and establish a temporary base called Little America Vabut. Look at the actual scale. This wasn't a scientific sightseeing trip. It was a full military task force sent to the exact region the Germans had claimed as Neuschwabenland just 8 years earlier. They carried out massive aerial mapping campaigns. They pushed deep into areas the 1939 expedition had photographed. And despite planning for a 6 to 8 month operation during the Antarctic summer, the whole thing was suddenly cut short. Highjump wrapped up in February 1947, after only a few months instead of the planned half year or more. One plane crashed early with fatalities. The fleet reportedly encountered unusually difficult ice conditions, and they pulled back faster than expected. The mainstream says, harsh weather, logistical problems, one tragic crash, mission accomplished anyway. But the surface doesn't forget the timing. Right after 2 German U-boats with erased logs show up in Argentina, the United States sends the biggest armed Antarctic force ever assembled straight toward the German claimed territory. They map obsessively. They test combat capabilities in polar conditions, then they leave early. Admiral Byrd himself later gave interviews that conspiracy researchers still quote to this day, warnings about the strategic importance of the polar regions and potential threats that could strike from pole to pole at incredible speeds. Whether those exact words were twisted by newspapers or not, the man who led the mission came back sounding far more concerned about future conflicts than someone who had simply counted penguins and taken pretty pictures. So here's the question the obedient historians refuse to sit with. If Neuschwabenland was just an abandoned whale oil survey with a few metal darts in the snow, why did the United States Navy respond less than a year after the war with the single largest military expedition Antarctica has ever seen? The darts are still there. The U-boats reached South America, Highjump came, mapped everything, and left in a hurry. The surface was already claimed, and someone, somewhere, seemed very interested in making sure it stayed that way. But the story doesn't end with Highjump's early retreat. In the months that followed, Admiral Richard E. Byrd, the man who led the largest military expedition Antarctica had ever seen, started giving interviews that sounded very different from a simple mapping mission. In one widely quoted 1947 interview, Byrd warned about the strategic importance of the polar regions. He spoke of potential enemies who could strike from pole to pole at incredible speeds. He talked about the need for the United States to prepare for invasions that could come from the polar areas. The obedient historians say he was talking about future Soviet threats or advanced aircraft in a post-war world, nothing more. But the surface doesn't ignore the pattern. 1939, Germans drop permanent metal darts across Neuschwabenland. 1945, U-boats with missing logs reach South America. 1946-47, America sends 4,700 armed men straight to the same territory and pulls back faster than planned. Then the commander returns talking about threats coming from the poles at impossible speeds. Coincidence stacked on coincidence, or was Highjump not just about training and mapping penguins, but about checking what the Germans had really built on the surface? The darts are still frozen in the ice. The photographs from both expeditions still exist, and the man who was sent to investigate came back sounding like someone who had seen more than he was allowed to say publicly. So let's bring it all together. The 1939 expedition didn't behave like a quick commercial survey. They claimed territory with permanent metal markers. They mapped obsessively, then key U-boats slipped away after surrender. America responded with overwhelming force and left in a hurry, and the commander issued warnings about the poles that still echo today. The mainstream calls it all whale fat, abandoned claims, and bad weather. We call it what it looks like from the surface. Some own claimed territory, some own protected it. And the obedient narrative still doesn't want you asking why. If this resonated with you, if you are tired of the same script being recycled every generation, push this video to others, share, like. And if you want to support me, subscribe. Keep noticing patterns. Noticer out.